Morning. Now, today in the States, a politician will ask Jersey's Chief Minister to say sorry to Graham Power, the former Chief of Police, who was suspended over the way he handled the investigation into abuse of children in care. The Care Inquiry report explored the political involvement in the police investigation known as Operation Rectangle, and it found there was no wish by politicians to interfere in the investigation. But the panel recorded what it called disquiet in the way that Mr Power's suspension was handled, and it said that the minister at the time, Deputy Andrew Lewis, had lied to the inquiry and the States about it. Deputy Andrew Lewis denies he lied and is fighting to clear his name. In a moment, I'll be asking what Mr Power makes of the inquiry's findings. But first, Deputy Russell Labby, who will ask the Chief Minister to make a formal apology, says the actual reason for the suspension was never made clear.
The Committee of Inquiry itself explains that it's not there to act as judge and jury, and it's sometimes quite difficult. It's very, very carefully written, and it sometimes seems that more investigation needs to be done. I think the sacking of Graham Power asks all sorts of questions that have not been answered yet. It may be uncomfortable, but I think it's prudent to get to the bottom of it, so this sort of thing can never happen again.
Deputy Russell Labby speaking there. Well, let's speak to Mr Power now. What do you make of the move for an official apology for the way in which you were suspended?
Well, I welcome it. I think an apology is about 9 years overdue. But let's see what happens. I'm not the one who's asking for an apology, but I think Deputy Labby is right when he says more investigation is needed. But yes, if any offer of an apology is made, I'll deal with it in a responsible way.
So what do you think of the Care Inquiry's decision to, and I quote, record its disquiet at the manner in which your suspension was handled? What do you make of that phrase?
Well, I think like everybody else who's looked at the detail, they look at the original justification that was given, and they can see it doesn't stand up. The paperwork that was created, the announcements that were made at the time, were all about a supposed review by the Metropolitan Police, which was critical of my role. It's since turned out that nobody involved had seen any report from the Metropolitan Police. The Metropolitan Police said, we did not make any criticism and you can't use our report for suspension purposes. And then it subsequently emerged at the Committee of Inquiry that they'd acted against legal advice anyway. So all of the original decisions that were given have been shown to be false. And in describing some of the things that were said, the Committee of Inquiry used a word, and they used the word lied. And that's a fairly explicit term for a Committee of Inquiry to use when they're talking about statements made by who was a senior politician at the time.
You're talking about Deputy Andrew Lewis there, and of course he is fighting to clear his name. But speaking to former Chief Minister Frank Walker, who was in charge at the time, he spoke to us here on BBC Radio Jersey and said he would do exactly the same thing. Here he is talking to us about your suspension.
He was in charge of the police of Jersey, he alone, unique position. His deputy, Mr Harper, was giving press conferences, normally at the gate of Hoder Legaren, in which at various times he claimed to have found a child's skull. We now know that to be incorrect. At other times claimed that there had been up to 6 murders of children at Hoder Legaren. We now know that was incorrect. And what I begged Mr Power to do was, using his position as Chief of Police, to appear, as is common practice in the UK when there's a major investigation, to appear as Chief of Police in uniform in front of the media and give a cold, factual assessment of what was actually going on. He declined to do it, and he allowed Mr Harper to run riot with his statements, which we now know were grossly misleading in many areas.
So did you put pressure on Deputy Andrew Lewis to suspend Graham Power?
I did not put pressure on him, but I totally agreed with him, and as I said, I would take exactly the same action today.
So what do you make of that?
Oh, right. Yes, firstly, about the 6 murders. The statement made, what Mr Walker is saying is that Lenny Harper stood at the gates of Hoder Legaren and said there were up to 6 murders within the grounds of a home. Show me the footage of Lenny Harper saying that there were multiple murders at Haute de la Garenne. That challenge has been thrown down since the first day of my suspension, and it still hasn't been met. Professional investigators have worked on this for days and for weeks, and all they come up with is footage of Lenny Harper saying there are suspicious things we want to investigate. There might be an innocent explanation. We are keeping our minds open.
The phrase, the partial remains of what is believed to have been a child, had been found at Haute de la Garenne. You yourself said to the Care Inquiry that was not good.
Yes, you can improve a lot of things with hindsight, but what Lenny Harper was doing was telling the truth about what had been conveyed to him by a Home Office forensic scientist. And that was in a written signed statement. And so you could say perhaps he was being too open, perhaps he was being too honest, that he should have been more guarded. But it's never been part of my argument that the investigation was perfect. But let's go back to what we were doing. We were trying to break down the barriers which had concealed horrific child abuse for decades. We were trying to draw attention to the fact of an inadequate protection of children in Jersey, which still exists today. Remember, the Committee of Inquiry found that vulnerable children are still at risk. We were doing something, and since we did something, we've had nothing but abuse from some of the people who did nothing. There's mention of things that happened on my watch. Let's talk about the things that happened on the watch of a succession of senior politicians, including Mr. Walker. That Jersey had a regime which failed to protect vulnerable children, which did not address repeated allegations of child abuse. The people who did nothing are criticising the people who tried to do something. And if what we did wasn't perfect, and I've never said it was perfect, at least we were making a determined effort on behalf of the children who were suffering, and we were continually abused and obstructed by the people who did nothing.
Now, of course, Mr. Walker isn't here to respond to that. He did say, though, he wanted you at the time to stand before the media and give the facts. Do you agree that would have been helpful in your role as Chief of Police rather than Lenny Harper?
I did repeated media appearances during the time, but the briefings that Lenny did were detailed question and answer sessions about the investigation itself. Of course, I wasn't running the investigation, I was running the police force. So certainly I can stand up and make a statement, but difficulty is that people might then ask questions. And because you're not in charge of the investigation, it is hard to answer those questions. But aren't we wondering off course? Because what in his court Mr. Walker is saying is that I was suspended because of things that Lenny Harper said during a press conference. Well, hang on, it doesn't say anything about that in the documents that were created at the time. The problem that people have is that an extensive justification was given for the suspension, which has since turned out and been exposed as completely false. The word lied has been used. It was contrary to legal advice. And since then, people have been clutching at straws, trying to think of something else to say. Well, they should have said it at the time.
Do you feel like you acted in the right way at the time? Would you have done anything differently at all? Would you have given more press conferences?
Well, I've never been involved in anything in the way of a major operation where I didn't end up afterwards thinking, I wish I'd done something different.
What would you have done differently in this case?
I think we could have got on the case sooner we were overwhelmed. That was the problem. We could have done all sorts of things in terms of rebutting some of the wild and misleading press reports that were out there. But the problem is we didn't get enough resources in place soon enough. We tried hard, but the fact is we're a tiny island force who were suddenly overwhelmed by the world's media. And there was a brief period where we were caught just a little bit off balance. We could have done that a bit differently. But what we were determined not to do was to slow down what we were doing, because what we were doing was creating a momentum which was encouraging people who'd suffered in silence for decades to come forward and talk to us. we've had some analysis done in my time, and there's been done since. Every time Lenny Harper went on television and talked about the developments in the inquiry, there was a surge in people coming. We had to pay overtime for people to answer the phone, for more and more people coming forward saying, yes, I am a victim. I've tried to report it 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Nobody would listen to me. I want to come forward now. And there are guidelines about this type of investigation which do say that creating a momentum in the media and getting people to believe that you might come forward and you might be believed and you might get justice is an important part of the inquiry, and creating that momentum involves making statements to the media which grab attention, which grab the headlines and get people coming forward and making reports. So yes, you can always pick over the small detail of these things, but the core of it is, what the committee of inquiry has found is, for whatever reason I was suspended, it was not the reason that was given at the time. There is some other reason, and they haven't got to the bottom of it, and it's still a secret. And wouldn't it be nice if the people who knew stepped forward and told the truth? This is doing Jersey no good, and what Jersey needs to do is move forward, admit its errors, and move forward, not keep rehearsing the arguments about what happened 10 years ago.
We understand you want to make a criminal complaint against Deputy Andrew Lewis, and you've written to the Chief Minister asking whether you can do that. What stage is that at? We spoke to the Chief Minister himself and he said that the letter was on his desk. Where are you up to?
Well, I've written to a Chief Minister not making any direct allegation against Andrew Lewis. What I've said is I draw his attention to the fact that there appear to be criminal allegations in the Committee of Inquiry report. And I've sent it to the Chief Minister, not because I expect him to deal with it, but I thought he should be aware of it and that he should pass it to the relevant Jersey authorities. And I've suggested that the matter be independently investigated in order to comply with the spirit of Recommendation 7, which is, again, that Jersey needs to get out of this Jersey way perception that some people are more equal than others. And so dealing with what I've had to say openly, transparently and independently would be a step in the right direction.
How do you think that Jersey can move on from the findings of the Kerr inquiry, in your view? There's some really, really difficult testimony in there and, a long list of recommendations, things that Jersey needs to change. Yeah,
well, firstly, stop trying to defend the indefensible. And
what do you mean when you say that? What's indefensible?
Well, because people are still, whenever a serious conversation starts about the abuse, someone tries to turn it into an argument about the abuse inquiry. And we've just heard some of that. You can nitpick around the abuse inquiry and what we said or didn't say and what we could have done better. And I've said I've never been involved in a perfect operation. I don't know about you, but I don't do perfect. I do my best. We need to stop talking about the abuse inquiry and talk about the abuse. I'd have thought. I think the abuse is about 100 times more important than the abuse inquiry. Admit it. And show determination to get hold of the recommendations, and particularly the most difficult recommendation of all, to dispel perceptions about the Jersey way. This ran throughout the abuse inquiry. People were saying, well, they're never going to believe the likes of me, and even if it gets investigated, even if it goes to the law officers, people will protect their friends in high places, and me, a small person, will never get justice. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying that thousands of people believe it to be true. And that is what needs to be tackled, and it's damn hard. And they could begin by seeing that what I have complained about is treated fairly, impartially, independently, in a way which would stand scrutiny in any part of the world.
Mr. Power, you're still clearly very passionate about this, almost a decade on. How have you moved on from that period in your life at the end of your career in the police?
Yeah, well, I'm happily and comfortably retired in North Yorkshire, and I don't spend all day thinking about Jersey. But I am in regular contact with people in Jersey, and particularly
Must have been a difficult way to end your career, though.
Yes, it was. And In a sense it was, but when I was suspended, people forget, I was well past my retirement date anyway. I was only in office to achieve a handover, and if they'd wanted me to leave quietly or to go away, they only had to ask. I mean, they could have said it's time for you to retire, but they wanted blood on the carpet instead, and that was a very difficult time. But I get reassurance in the fact that, I mean, one of the people who suffered from abuse was in touch with me recently and said, don't, whatever you do, give in. Don't just retire quietly. Don't let us down, because we need your voice to keep reminding people of what happened and what needs to be done. And it's that sort of thing that keeps me going. And I'm quite content to give some time every week to Jersey Matters, although I spend most of my time in complete retirement.
Do you look back and feel as though you're proud of the fact that people have come forward off the back of Operation Rectangle? Yes, because whatever people say about the inquiry and my role or anybody else's role, what we did was break down a solid wall of silence that had been bottling these things up for decades. And we created a climate in which people could come forward and say, yes, other people have got justice, I might be able to get justice as well. And some optimism on the part of people who felt they stood no chance, because that's what people are continually saying to us. We stand no chance. What's the point of making a statement? They, the great anonymous they, will only throw it in a bin. They'll find an excuse to do nothing. The likes of us aren't going to get justice in Jersey. That's what people are saying to us all the time. And if we can play a part, if I can play any part at all in trying to overturn that horrible situation that I've never encountered anywhere else that I've policed, where the mass of the population does not trust the criminal justice system to bring them justice. If we can break down that barrier and turn that around, then I think it's all worthwhile. Graham Power, thank you for your time this morning. He's the former Chief of Police in Jersey. Deputy Russell Labby is today going to ask Jersey's Chief Minister to say sorry to Mr Power, who was suspended over the way he handled the investigation into the abuse of children in care. He himself says it wasn't a perfect inquiry. You can hear that question from Deputy Labby from 9:30 on Odd 1026 medium wave service with our political reporter Chris Rayner. It's also online, bbc.co.uk/Radio Jersey.